Welcome back. Now with the engine back in the frame, I can make a start on the electrical system. I'll start by going over the main components, checking they're all good and giving them a tidy up. And then I'm going to get the main wiring loom out and thoroughly inspect it, clean it and do any repairs that need doing. It's pushing 30 years old and I don't want to find out when I put it all back together there's a little niggling issue in here somewhere that I didn't find. So I'm going to go through it thoroughly and make sure everything's tip top. Let's go. The alternator needed a good clean and check over, as did the starter motor, which I stripped, cleaned and checked the brushes had plenty of life left. A quick test and I'm happy with that. After a good clean, I reinstalled the alternator onto the engine. I did remove the cover to give the regulator and rectifier a quick check over and clean up with contact cleaner and it all looked good. Then I gave the cover a fresh coat of satin black to tidy things up. Then I fit the starter motor back onto the engine. I fit the engine ground strap that connects the starter motor to battery ground. Next up, I reinstalled the vacuum takeoff nozzles onto the inlet manifolds. I dug out the rest of the main electrical components to get an idea of their condition, and I took them all outside for a clean up and proper inspection. Right, so where are we up to? I have now cleaned the loom. I've got all the bits that I've just tidied up and cleaned up outside. I went through the whole thing with a bit of a damp, moist rag with a bit of sort of soapy solution on it just to sort of clean up all the conduit, all the tape, all the connections and all the insulation on the actual wires themselves. I also peeled back any of the insulation tape that looked a bit suspect and found quite a few little bodges that have been done over the years. The main thing is that there was clearly an alarm system fitted at some point. Couple of signs of that. The indicators were all spliced into. There was a diode in the flasher relay circuit, so there's lots of different things that suggest that. Biggest of which was a big fat sticker on the fuse box that said alarm system fitted. But the repairs haven't been great, so I'm going to go through them and make sure they're perfectly fine. There's also a couple of really worrying ones as well, so I'll just make sure that's all good. I've got my soldering kit ready to go, new connectors if I need to replace any connectors at all. I've ordered replacement wire in the correct gauge for the bits that I'm replacing or extending bits on that I can get the right colour. Why don't I just use the right colour? Heat shrink tubing for any of the repairs I made. I've got these solder seal wire connectors that are like that heat shrink with a bit of solder inside that helps to fuse the joint. I haven't really used them much. They're probably very good, but I quite like the idea of soldering the joint before I put anything on, but it could be a good belt and braces approach. Got some electrical tape. Tester tape as well, so I've got sort of a fabric cloth tape. Bit of dielectric grease, it's always good for keeping water and other stuff out of the connectors. And I've got these little files. These are just like kind of tweezers that have got a kind of gritty texture outside and in, so you can really get inside a connector and get the blades nice and clean, especially if they've got corrosion on. So everything's cleaned up. I'm going to just take it inside and sit on the dining table and go through all these bits, and then I'll come back in here when I've got the loom ready to go back on the bike. I'll see you then. First up was this diode in the flasher relay circuit. I removed it and replaced the rest of the wire, including a new blade connector for the block. To test it, I checked the wiring diagram to find where the other end comes out, which is in the block connector for the left-hand switchgear. So I did a continuity test with the multimeter to check that there was no unwanted resistance between the 2 points. Good. This dodgy joint was cut out and repaired, then I wrapped the whole area again properly. This questionable crimp connector on the horn circuit wants replacing, but when I removed it the copper had oxidised, which means it won't take solder well and the conductivity would be pretty crap. I ended up going back about 7 inches to find decent copper, so I opted to replace the whole length on both sides of the branch. With new flag connectors on the end, that's that one sorted. The bullet connectors on the indicators had seen better days, so I replaced those with new ones. I snipped off the excess on these splices and shrink wrapped them, as well as shrink wrapping these splices on the headlight circuit. The bulb connectors had actually got hot and started to melt at some point, likely from corrosion on the contacts, so I replaced those completely with new flag connectors and new blocks. The last thing on the main loom was retaping the brackets where it clips into the frame. and then I moved on to the coils and HT leads. They needed a good clean up, but I still wasn't happy with the bracket, so I took it apart, gave it a fresh coat of paint and cleaned up the hardware. Much better. I did the same thing to the bracket that holds the igniter unit and then refitted that. I think one of the only reasons I still have this on the Skylift is because it doesn't have the side stand on it. So I thought I'd jump ahead and start getting the side stand tidied up, then I can fit that, and it means if I need to use this for the other bike, which I did and I couldn't and it annoyed me, I wouldn't have to worry about it and I'll be able to just move this around without the stand. So I'm going to get the side stand. The bracket itself got cleaned up, painted. Good thing about having like a part that's so close to the sprocket is that you get a lot of chain lube flung across stuff there, so underneath the grime things are actually quite solid and clean. Spring, that was pretty good, but I just gave it a good clean up and then a little bit of coat of paint just to make it look a bit nicer and protect it for a few more years. Side stand switch, tested that all works well, and the actual stand itself, sandblasted that, gave it a lick of paint, bit of primer, a bit of paint, and I gave it a clear coat as well, so it's got a slightly shiny kind of glossy look, but it's close to that kind of original look it has, and I just know it means it will just stand up to the abuse that it will expect more. But yeah, I mounted the bracket to the frame and then assembled the rest of the components of the side stand. I finally got myself a spring puller, and wow, this is a lot easier than the pliers and prayers method I've used so far. The pivot bolt threads into the bracket, and there's also a lock nut that goes on the back. So with that tightened up and all the bolts torqued up to spec, it's time to test it out. Okay Tom, well done. Now get back on task. Okay, so Loom done. In terms of everything being gone through, everything's been fixed that was broken, repairs, replacements, that sort of stuff, that's all good. I've also been through the HT leads and the coils and cleaned them up. Everything on that's now tidied up and ready to go. All these components and that sort of stuff have all just been cleaned up and made sure they're all good. And then I've also printed off the manual pages for the Loom and hose routing for these sort of bits so that I know exactly where everything's meant to go from the factory rather than just guessing it when I get back together. But before I do any of the Loom work, I'm going to put spark plugs in. I'm going to fit that baffle plate that makes the cam chain noise a little bit quieter. I've got the clean air system stuff that goes on top of the cylinder head cover because that goes underneath the baffle plate, or that's got to go on before I can do any of the HT leads and the Loom work through there. So I'm going to get these bits done and then get started on Loom work. I fit the new spark plugs into the engine, and if you're doing this you'll need a thin-walled 16mm spark plug socket for these, as the tunnels are quite narrow. The foam that sits under the baffle plate cleaned up nicely, so I fit that, then wriggled the plate into position. The manifolds for the clean air system had cleaned up well, so they went back in over the top of the baffle plate. I fit the vacuum operated valve next, and because I didn't think to check, I'm actually fitting it backwards here, so I'll need to correct that later. The cam chain noise quietening plate thing went onto the side of the engine next, including the clamp on the top bolt. I got a little kick fitting this nice clean igniter unit onto the freshly powder coated subframe. Now a wise man called Dave told me it's well worth upgrading the stock wiring for the starter circuit with some heavier gauge stuff. So I picked up a length of 16 square millimeter wire and made up some fresh lengths for both the earth strap and the positive side. Not forgetting to splice in the bullet connector for the Loom's earth lead. I hadn't really had any issues with the starter system before, but Dave noticed a considerably stronger starter motor performance as a result. It just feels like belt and braces. I fitted the new and improved ground strap to the engine, and then fitted up the positive side of the starter motor circuit. I checked the routing in the book. It wants to go under and round the coils and then over the frame truss, where it goes through a clamp and then up to the battery. I left plenty of slack in the loop for now to make it easier to get the coils and HT leads through. They went in next. They slot into the tab on the frame and are secured by this central bolt. I checked the routing for the leads, making sure the clips were positioned in the right place. Happy with the layout, I routed the leads and pushed the plug caps down into the spark plug tunnels. I corrected the arrangement of the leads in this clip so that they match the diagram. Then it was time to give the subframe under tray a clean, ready to go back in. I temporarily fitted the front bolts, then gave that battery lifting bracket thing a clean, put that in, and then began working the starter motor circuit cables into position. Then I brought the main loom over and laid it across the centre frame bar. The two poppers click into the holes in the ignition coil bracket. I took out the under tray bolts to give myself more room to feed the loom through, making sure it matched the routing in the book. I fed the front half of the loom between the frame rail and the alternator and pulled it all through neatly. Then I started connecting up the primary side of the coil packs. Next, I connected up the alternator. Then the connector for the oil pressure switch and pickup coil. I fitted the fuse box onto the under tray with the rubber pegs. Then fit the connector blocks. I fit the loom's battery ground connector and then worked back, connecting the igniter unit and feeding the wires through for the rear lights. I fitted the connector for the starter solenoid, then the fuel pump relay, and finally connected up and fitted the flasher relay. As I was fitting the rear bolts for the subframe, I thought I'd check the conductivity of the frame, as this is where the frame earth connector goes. The powder coat wasn't helping, so I ground it back to bare metal, fitted the bolt and checked again. Success! So now that the main part of the electrical stuff is over, I want to kind of make a beeline to hearing the engine run now. So I want to get the cooling system sort of tidied up and restored and put back together, and then fuel system, so carburetors, fuel pump, all that sort of stuff as well. So next up, oil filter, oil, clutch slave cylinder, clutch master cylinder, exhaust, cooling system. That's pretty much going to be all on the next episode, so I'm going to get stuck in, hopefully be back in a few weeks with the next step. See you soon.